The food your doctor calls healthy is quietly feeding the fire inside you. Let's find out why. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Sandra. She was 61 years old, a retired school principal from Nashville, Tennessee. Careful woman, conscientious about her health. She ate what she genuinely believed was a healthy diet: whole wheat bread, low-fat yogurt, orange juice every morning, vegetable oils for cooking, and plenty of what the packaging described as heart-healthy grains. She exercised 3 times a week. She took her medications exactly as prescribed. And yet her inflammatory markers, specifically a blood test called C-reactive protein, which measures systemic inflammation, were through the roof. Her joints ached constantly. She was exhausted by noon. Her doctor kept telling her that inflammation was just part of getting older. Here is what nobody had told Sandra. Several of the foods she had been eating every single day, foods marketed to her as healthy, foods recommended by mainstream nutritional guidelines for decades, were systematically fueling the very inflammation destroying her quality of life. When we identified those foods and replaced them with specific anti-inflammatory alternatives, Sandra's C-reactive protein dropped by more than half in 12 weeks. Her joint pain became manageable. Her energy returned. Today, I am going to show you exactly what the research says about inflammation after 50, which foods are secretly feeding it, which foods fight it, and why so much of what you have been told may have been working against you. We will dive into all of that in today's episode. I am Dr. Alexander Wellrich. In 30 years of clinical practice, I have watched chronic inflammation quietly dismantle the health of patients who were doing their honest best to follow the rules. And the tragedy, the part that still troubles me, is that many of those rules were wrong. Not maliciously wrong, but wrong in ways that the evolving science has made increasingly clear. The nutritional consensus of the 1980s and 1990s, which shaped an entire generation's understanding of healthy eating, got several things significantly incorrect. And people over 50 are paying the price right now in their joints, their cardiovascular system, their brain, and their energy levels. Chronic inflammation is not a minor inconvenience. It is the underlying driver of most of the serious diseases associated with aging: cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, certain cancers, and autoimmune conditions. Understanding how to control it through diet may be one of the most powerful things you can do for your long-term health. That is what today's episode is about. If this kind of honest, science-based conversation is useful to you, please subscribe to this channel. It costs you nothing and it helps us reach more people who need this information. Now, let us get into the science. First, let me make sure we are talking about the same thing, because the word inflammation gets used in a lot of different contexts, and it is important to distinguish between 2 very different types. Acute inflammation is your body's brilliant, life-saving response to injury or infection. You cut your finger, bacteria enter the wound, your immune system floods the area with white blood cells and chemical signals to fight the invasion and begin repair. The area becomes red, warm, swollen, and painful. Within days, it heals. That kind of inflammation is not the enemy. It is one of the most remarkable features of human biology. Chronic inflammation is something entirely different. It is a low-grade, persistent activation of the immune system that does not switch off. There is no wound to heal, no infection to fight. But the inflammatory machinery keeps running anyway, quietly, in the background, day after day, year after year. You cannot feel it the way you feel a sprained ankle, but it is doing damage at the cellular level. It damages blood vessel walls, creating the conditions for cardiovascular disease. It interferes with insulin signaling, contributing to type 2 diabetes. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and promotes neuroinflammation, which researchers now believe is a central mechanism in Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. And it accelerates what scientists call biological aging, the rate at which your cells deteriorate relative to your chronological age. A landmark paper published in Nature Medicine coined the term inflammaging, a combination of inflammation and aging, to describe this phenomenon. The researchers found that chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the most consistent biological features of the aging process across virtually every tissue and organ system in the body. It is not a side effect of getting older. In many ways, it is a primary mechanism of it. And here is the critical point. What you eat 3 times a day, every single day, is either pouring fuel on that fire or helping to put it out. Now let me talk about the foods that research has consistently linked to increased inflammatory markers. And I want to acknowledge up front, some of these will surprise you because several of them have been marketed as healthy for decades. The first category is refined seed oils. Vegetable oils, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, are extraordinarily high in omega-6 fatty acids. Your body needs some omega-6, but the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in the modern American diet has shifted from what researchers estimate was historically around 4-to-1 to somewhere between 15-to-1 and 20-to-1. That imbalance is powerfully pro-inflammatory. A paper published in the journal Biomedicine and Pharmacotherapy described excess omega-6 consumption as a driver of the chronic inflammatory state now endemic in Western populations. The second category is refined carbohydrates and added sugars. White bread, white rice, most breakfast cereals, crackers, pastries, sweetened beverages. These foods cause rapid spikes in blood glucose. Every glucose spike triggers an insulin response, and repeated insulin spikes trigger the release of inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers that activate the immune system. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that diets high in refined carbohydrates were significantly associated with elevated C-reactive protein, the primary blood marker of systemic inflammation. The third category will genuinely surprise many people: whole wheat products. Now, I want to be precise here because this is nuanced. For many adults, particularly after 50, gliadin, a protein component of gluten found in wheat, can increase intestinal permeability and trigger a low-grade immune response even in people who do not have celiac disease. A study published in Nutrients found that gliadin activated an inflammatory pathway in intestinal cells across multiple human cell lines, regardless of genetic predisposition to celiac disease. This does not mean everyone needs to eliminate wheat, but it does mean that for many people experiencing unexplained inflammation, wheat may be a contributing factor worth examining. The fourth category is ultra-processed food in general. And here I mean the full spectrum: packaged snacks, fast food, processed meats, flavored dairy products, most convenience foods. A large prospective study published in the BMJ followed more than 100,000 adults and found that a 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a 12% increase in cancer risk and significant increases in cardiovascular disease, both conditions driven substantially by chronic inflammation. And then there is alcohol. Even moderate regular alcohol consumption, the kind that for years was described as heart-healthy, based on studies we now understand were significantly flawed, has been shown in more recent research to increase inflammatory markers and disrupt the gut microbiome in ways that promote systemic inflammation. A comprehensive review published in Alcohol Research found that ethanol and its metabolites directly activate inflammatory pathways in the liver, gut, and brain. Let me come back to Sandra for a moment because her story illustrates this perfectly. When we went through her diet in detail, the pattern was immediately clear. Every single morning, orange juice, a concentrated source of fructose with no fiber to slow absorption. Whole wheat toast with vegetable oil spread. Low-fat flavored yogurt, which, when you read the label, contains more sugar per serving than a small candy bar. For lunch, a sandwich on commercial whole-grain bread with a side of crackers. She was not eating junk food by anyone's conventional definition. She was eating what the packaging, the food pyramid, and decades of nutritional messaging had told her was the right choice. We did not put her on a restrictive elimination diet. We made targeted swaps based on the research. The processed seed oils went out, extra virgin olive oil came in. The refined grains were dramatically reduced and replaced with legumes, vegetables, and whole food carbohydrate sources. Fermented foods replaced the flavored yogurt. Within 12 weeks, her C-reactive protein had dropped from 4.2 to 1.8 milligrams per liter. Her doctor, who had told her inflammation was just aging, called it remarkable. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Because fighting inflammation is not just about removing the bad. There is a specific set of foods that research shows actively lowers inflammatory markers, and several of them are ones you might not expect. Let me now give you the positive side of this equation, because this is where the research becomes genuinely exciting. The most well-documented anti-inflammatory dietary pattern in the scientific literature is the Mediterranean diet. A landmark meta-analysis published in Nutrients reviewed 21 randomized controlled trials and found consistent, significant reductions in C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, and other key inflammatory markers in participants following a Mediterranean-style eating pattern. And the key components are not exotic or expensive. Extra virgin olive oil is perhaps the most studied single food in this context. It contains a compound called oleocanthal, which researchers at the Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia found inhibits the same inflammatory enzyme as ibuprofen, just through a gentler, food-based mechanism. A study in the European Journal of Nutrition found that daily consumption of extra virgin olive oil was associated with significantly lower inflammatory markers in adults over 55. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, herring, are rich in long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA. These directly counteract the pro-inflammatory effect of excess omega-6. A meta-analysis published in PLOS ONE found that omega-3 supplementation significantly reduced C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, and tumor necrosis factor, three of the most important markers of systemic inflammation, across multiple clinical trials. Berries deserve special attention. Blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, and raspberries are extraordinarily rich in anthocyanins, a class of polyphenols that have been shown in multiple studies to reduce oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that daily blueberry consumption for 6 weeks reduced markers of oxidative stress and improved vascular function in adults with metabolic syndrome. Leafy green vegetables, spinach, kale, arugula, Swiss chard, contain vitamin K, folate, and multiple antioxidants that directly suppress inflammatory gene expression. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that high dietary intake of leafy greens was independently associated with lower levels of inflammatory biomarkers in older adults. And finally, turmeric. Specifically its active compound curcumin. A systematic review published in Nutrients analyzed 15 clinical trials and found that curcumin supplementation produced significant reductions in C-reactive protein across multiple population groups. The catch is bioavailability. Curcumin is poorly absorbed on its own. Consuming it with black pepper, which contains a compound called piperine, increases absorption by up to 2,000%, according to research published in Planta Medica. Diet is the most powerful lever, but it does not operate in isolation. Let me walk you through the other factors that research shows significantly influence your inflammatory load after 50. Sleep is the first one, and I keep returning to sleep across these episodes because the evidence is simply too strong to treat it as optional. A study published in the journal Sleep found that adults who slept fewer than 6 hours per night had significantly elevated levels of interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein compared to those sleeping 7 to 8 hours. Every night of inadequate sleep is a night of elevated inflammation. It accumulates. Chronic psychological stress is the second factor. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, is actually anti-inflammatory in short bursts. That is part of its function. But chronic elevation of cortisol paradoxically leads to cortisol resistance. Your cells stop responding to its anti-inflammatory signal, and inflammatory cytokines begin to dominate. A study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showed that individuals reporting chronic stress had a significantly blunted anti-inflammatory response and higher baseline inflammation than low-stress controls. Exercise is the third factor, and here there is a nuance worth understanding. Moderate, consistent exercise is powerfully anti-inflammatory. It reduces inflammatory markers, improves insulin sensitivity, and supports the gut microbiome. But excessive, very high-intensity exercise, particularly in people who are not well recovered, can temporarily increase inflammatory markers. For people over 50, The sweet spot is consistent, moderate activity. Brisk walking, swimming, cycling, resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. More is not always better. Consistency is. And finally, visceral fat. The fat stored around your abdominal organs rather than under your skin. Visceral fat is not metabolically inert. It is an active endocrine organ that secretes pro-inflammatory cytokines continuously. Research published in the journal Obesity found that visceral fat was one of the strongest independent predictors of circulating inflammatory markers in adults over 50. Reducing visceral fat, which responds well to the dietary and lifestyle changes we are discussing, is one of the most effective things you can do to lower your systemic inflammatory load. I want to give you one more thing that most health videos leave out: how to actually measure what is happening in your body so you are not guessing. There are several blood tests that can give you a concrete picture of your inflammatory status. The most commonly used is high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, or hs-CRP. This is different from the standard CRP test. The high-sensitivity version detects lower levels of inflammation with greater precision. An hs-CRP below 1 mg per liter is considered low risk. Between 1 and 3 is moderate. Above 3 is high. You can request this test from your primary care physician. It is covered by most insurance plans and gives you a baseline to work from. Interleukin-6 is another marker worth asking about. It is a cytokine, an inflammatory signaling molecule, that has been closely linked to biological aging, frailty, and cognitive decline in research studies. Homocysteine is a third. Elevated levels are associated with both cardiovascular inflammation and neuroinflammation. And fasting insulin, not just fasting glucose, but insulin itself, gives you a window into metabolic inflammation that standard diabetes screening often misses. I am not suggesting you demand all of these tests at your next appointment. I am suggesting you have an informed conversation with your doctor about your inflammatory status. Ask specifically about hs-CRP, know your number. Then use the dietary and lifestyle tools we have discussed today to move it in the right direction, and retest in 3 months. Numbers make change real. When Sandra saw her C-reactive protein drop from 4.2 to 1.8, it was not abstract. It was proof on paper that what she was doing was working. Here is what you can start doing right now. 1. Replace your cooking oils. If you are cooking with vegetable oil, corn oil, or soybean oil, replace them with extra virgin olive oil for low to medium heat and avocado oil for higher heat. This single swap shifts your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio meaningfully within weeks. 2. Eat fatty fish twice a week. 2 servings of salmon, sardines, mackerel, or herring per week provides the EPA and DHA your body needs to counter chronic inflammatory signaling. Canned sardines and canned salmon are affordable, convenient, and just as effective as fresh. 3. Add a handful of berries to your daily routine. Blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, fresh or frozen, it does not matter. A study from Harvard found that frozen berries retain essentially the same polyphenol content as fresh. Add them to plain yogurt, oatmeal, or eat them as a snack. 4. Dramatically reduce refined carbohydrates. You do not need to eliminate carbohydrates. You need to shift your sources. White bread, commercial crackers, sweetened cereals and pastries out. Legumes, sweet potatoes, whole oats, and quinoa in. 5. Add turmeric with black pepper to your cooking 3 to 4 times per week. A golden milk recipe, a turmeric scrambled egg, a curry dish. Find a preparation you enjoy and make it habitual. The black pepper is not optional if you want the absorption benefit. 6. Ask your doctor for an hs-CRP test at your next appointment. Get your baseline number, then return in 3 months after implementing these changes and see where you land. Make it measurable. Let me bring everything together. Chronic inflammation after 50 is not inevitable. It is not simply the price of aging. It is a biological process that is measurable, addressable, and significantly influenced by choices you make every single day, particularly the choice of what you put on your plate. The foods that have been marketed to your generation as healthy, refined vegetable oils, whole wheat products, low-fat flavored dairy, sweetened beverages, have in many cases been fueling the very inflammation they were supposed to prevent. The research on this is no longer fringe. It is in Nature Medicine, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the BMJ, and PLOS ONE. The good news is that the anti-inflammatory dietary pattern is not a deprivation diet. It is olive oil and berries and fatty fish and leafy greens and legumes. It is food that is genuinely delicious, and it is food that the research shows can produce measurable changes in your inflammatory markers within weeks. Give your body what it needs. Remove what is working against it. Measure the results. If today's episode was useful, please like this video and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means a great deal for this channel. Leave me a comment below. Tell me which food swap you are going to make first. And in our next episode, we are going to talk about something that affects nearly every person over 50 and almost nobody addresses directly: the dramatic decline in NAD+ levels with age, why it may be the most important molecule in your body that you have never heard of, and what the cutting-edge research says about restoring it. I think it will genuinely surprise you. Until then, take care of yourself, from the inside out.